Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in. My name is Clara and I am excited to walk you through my research on how Vietnamese organizations perceive the current social media use in crisis communication in Vietnam, presented at today's 5th International Conference on Communication and Media Studies. This study explores how Vietnamese organizations view the use of social media in crisis communication and how social media can support the current practice of crisis communication. This topic is important because compared to all other applications, Vietnamese people have online forums and blogs as their preferred social media channels to share information. During previous crises in the country, Facebook, forums, and blogs were repeatedly used as the main channels for individuals to voice their concerns. This is no surprise. In Vietnam, social media penetration rate is 67% with 65 million users. Facebook is ranked at the top 3 sites in Vietnam. It is ranked even above most traditional news websites, including the nation's most popular and influential ones. However, only few studies conducted research on Vietnamese PR practice, and those usually focus on marketing purposes, not reputation management or crisis communication. By conducting a series of in-depth interviews with PR practitioners in Vietnam, this study aimed to give a thorough view on how Vietnamese companies view the use of social media in crisis communication, and how the social media can support the current practice of crisis communication. There are 2 theories used in this research. The first one is the diffusion of innovation theory, or DOI. The study treats social media for crisis communication as an innovation that is potentially still diffusing in Vietnam. The other theory is Hofstede's cultural dimensions. As organizations are bound by national cultures, the values within them are similar to those within the national society. I used Hofstede's dimension to see how social media is used in a cultural, aka Vietnam, context. In DOI, diffusion is a special case of communication in which a new idea or practice is considered. There are 5 interrelated attributes of an innovation that contribute to the rate of adoption, the positive or negative persuasion to adopt. The 5 attributes were examined in this research, and they are relative advantage, the perceived advantage of an innovation compared to previous ideas; compatibility, how an innovation is perceived as being consistent with the current norms, values, and experience of users; complexity, how perceivably difficult or easy an innovation is to understand and use; trialability, the possibility that an innovation can be divided into smaller parts to test its effectiveness before a full adoption; and finally, observability, the extent to which the results of an innovation are easily communicated and observed. In addition to DOI, this study applied Hofstede's cultural dimensions to explain how culture influences the decision to adopt social media for crisis communication use in a Vietnamese organization. The cultural dimension discussed in this research is power distance, or the extent to which a society expects and accepts that power is unequally distributed. Vietnam scores pretty high on the PD index at 70 points. It means that in a Vietnamese organization, employees accept a hierarchical order, expect inherent inequalities, and understand that they should act appropriately toward their managers. It is thus expected that in Vietnamese organizations, the managers are the ones who make the final decisions regarding innovating. If the managers decide to adopt social media in crisis communication, the PR team and the rest of the employees will accept these new channels without questioning. This study employed a set of semi-structured interviews with 12 Vietnamese PR practitioners. These practitioners were either working at in-house PR departments or in agencies. Among them, 6 were male and 6 were female, 7 worked in an agency while 5 worked in-house, and the participants had varying ranges of experience. 4 participants had 2 to 5 years of PR industry experience, 5 had 6 to 8 years, and 3 had 9 or more years. This research design aims to explore in more depth the perceptions and intentions to use social media in crisis communication strategies among organizations. The target products of these interviews are explanations of the findings in the review's literature and expectations of how social media can be used in crisis communication in Vietnam in the near future. There are 4 key findings of this research, as you can see here. First, the participants replied that the advantages of social media are perceived relative advantage and observability. Vietnamese public relations practitioners think that social media offers greater transparency compared to traditional media, has a wider and faster reach, and allows practitioners to quickly check stakeholders' reactions. Using social media in crisis communication is better, quicker, and more transparent than using traditional media, and the results can be observed more easily. All 12 participants stated that it is difficult for a Vietnamese organization to respond to a crisis through social media, because organizations do not have enough resources to communicate with stakeholders on all channels and would need highly trained staff to respond to negative comments. They explained that social media has too many channels for crisis communicators to maintain an active presence on all of them. They also explained that the conversations are often so negative that the company would need extremely carefully trained and experienced individuals to handle messages on these channels. To summarize, Vietnamese public relations practitioners think that the main disadvantage of social media is complexity, which means that social media have too many channels and flows of information, making it complicated to fully control. Next, the interview established that Vietnamese public relations practitioners who had not encountered a crisis were more open to using social media in a crisis. In contrast, Vietnamese public relations practitioners who had already encountered the crisis would see both social and traditional media with positive comments, try to take a crisis response away from social media, try to delete negative comments, or at least their organization's name from the comments, or would only use social media if a crisis started on social media. The other finding is that Vietnamese practitioners think that the decision whether to use social media in crisis communication in Vietnam is not influenced by the power distance or organization hierarchy. When asked if the participants think bigger organizations are more innovative and adopt a new technology, in this case social media in crisis communication, more easily than smaller or startup organizations, no participants think the organization size or hierarchy matters. Further, all participants mentioned that the choice to use social media depends on the nature of a crisis, not the nature of their organizations. This study provided useful insight to DOI theory as it can be applied to crisis communication field today. The results are consistent with the DOI prediction that since social media is perceived to have relative advantages, observability, and the social system support, it is likely to be adopted in crisis communication. However, the results also show that 2 DOI attributes, complexity and trialability, were thought as disadvantages instead of advantages, making organizations hesitant to adopt social media in crisis communication. As DOI connotes that innovations should be eventually diffused and adopted, rather than be reinvented or rejected. This finding suggests that DOI and its attributes could also be used to examine if an innovation should be revised before adoption or be rejected. On the other hand, this study also seeks to see if power distance can influence the adoption of social media in crisis communication. All participants agreed that the decision-making process is a team process. The manager just has the final say. As the participants represented organizations with different levels of power distance and their opinions were consistent, it is safe to conclude that the power distance plays pretty little role in the decision-making process of social media use in crisis communication. In conclusion, social media has different advantages, but it is too complex. It requires well-trained staff to handle crisis communication on social media. Organizations and practitioners who had no or little experience in managing crises expressed more willingness to use these channels for the purpose than those with greater experience. Crises will not disappear from organizational settings, and social media may become even more integrated into people's daily lives. Therefore, exploring the connections between crisis communication and social media is and will continue to be an important focus of the public relations field, not only in academia or in Vietnam, but also in business practice generally and in a global context. And here is the list of references I used for this study. Thank you so much for your interest and for your attention. If you have any questions about this study, feel free to contact me. My contact information is right below. Thanks again, and I wish you have a nice day.